Welcome to the APO Productivity Talk series. I am Siriphong, Deputy Director General, SME Promotion Department, SME Promotion, Lao PDR, and the moderator for today's Talk. Today's topic is SME Transformation for Meeting SDG in Asia. SME are the backbone of Asia economy, contributing significantly to its growth and vitality. Their important lies not only in generating income and employment, but also in fostering innovation, entrepreneurship, and regional development. SME often serve as incubators for new ideas, technologies, and job opportunity, driving economic dynamism. In Asia, undergoes rapid economic expansion. SME play a pivotal role in diversifying industry, promoting inclusive growth, and mitigating regional disparity. The adaptability and resilience contribute to economic stability, especially during challenging times. In case of Lao PDR, MSME plays a significant role in job creation and national economic development. According to the third National Economic Census in 2020, there were almost 140,000 enterprises nationwide, by classifying enterprises with more than 99.8% of all its establishment, and for the micro enterprises, about 94%. SME also contribute more than 80% of employment created by all enterprises in Lao PDR. In addition, the competitiveness of SME in Asia is intricately linked to the achievement of SDGs, creating a pathway for sustainable, inclusive, and equitable economic growth across the region. To help us navigate this interesting topic, we are honored to have Dr. Amit Kapoor with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me with you, Dr. Sa. And of course, thanks a lot to the APO for inviting me for this interesting session.
Yeah, Dr. Kapoor is Honorary Chairman of Institute for Competitiveness, India, and President of the India Council of Competitiveness. He has been inducted into Competitiveness Hall of Fame, administered by Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness at the Harvard Business School, where he oversees the competition of the Porter Prize for Competitiveness. Amit is author of several books on the economy of India, including The Age of Awakening, the story of the Indian economy since independence, published by Pynchon Random House 2018, and he is principal author of The Competitiveness Roadmap of India at 100 2022. He has been a key participant in international research initiatives to develop index of economic impact, including Ease of Living Index, the Municipal Performance Index, and the Social Progress Index. He received the Scotch Economic Award in 2023 as one of the 7 most influential economists in India. Thank you for giving us your valuable time, Dr. Kapoor. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you, Sa. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. I'm fairly good, very excited for this interaction and looking forward to the presentation and, of course, the questions that follow thereon, if at all there are any.
So let me begin the session by inviting Dr. Kapoor to give his insights on SME transformation for meeting the SDG in Asia. Dr. Kapoor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. This is a very, very interesting topic that we are really trying to delve into. And it is on this whole idea of SME transformation for meeting the sustainable development goals. And of course, the larger idea that we are really looking at is about competitiveness. Because if you really look at it, if we are able to drive competitiveness of small and medium enterprises, that would mean that we are, one, improving prosperity of the countries. The second thing is that, of course, we are actually going to be mitigating a lot of crises that we might actually end up seeing or we actually see in the world. The issues of inequality, the issues of growth, and that is what can actually get answered through many, many things that can actually happen through the small and medium enterprises. But having said that, if you really look at the larger ambit of what is really happening in the world, let's look at the numbers here. If you really look at what are the major drivers of economic growth across the world, it has always been the small and medium enterprises which have been driving economic growth. If you really look at the worldwide figure, what you would notice is that 90% of businesses worldwide are small and medium enterprises. They employ close to about 50% of the population. But now, if you really look at the Asian context, what you do see is that 97% of the businesses are small and medium enterprises. And then 69% of the labor force is employed by the SMEs, and it contributes close to about 41% of the GDP. So this is a huge figure if you really look at it. And that leads us to an important question, that if you really want to solve the problems of the world, or if you really want to face the challenges that the world is facing, and what are the kind of challenges? Like the biggest one is going to be, say, climate change. And if we really have to solve for that kind of a problem, we would eventually have to find solutions through the SMEs. If you really talk about the other crisis that the world is facing right now, and that unique crisis that the world is facing, and it's not that Asia is not facing that bit of a situation, that crisis is predominantly of, say, job creation. And where is job creation going to happen? The fundamental question that always arises is that is job creation going to happen by the large enterprises, or is it going to be the small and medium enterprises? I think both of them work in tandem, but at the end of the day, the majority of job creation will always happen through the small and medium enterprises, because they want to actually create local solutions for the country or for the local context, or they even export. The second thing is they also become part of the whole ancillary system or the cluster that actually gets created or operated over a period of time. If you really look at it, predominantly SMEs will focus on local economies. And when you talk about local economies, 80% of the businesses that these guys are going to do, or SMEs do, will cater to the local solutions that they're actually creating, whether it is the cities or the rural areas or the districts that you talk about, or what you would call as, say, counties, or what you might actually call as states or provinces. And that is where SMEs will actually find answers and solve for the challenges. But having said that, if you really look at this, the larger thing, and that is about, say, SME transformation for achievement of SDGs by 2030, like there is an important aspect here, and that is that SMEs play such a significant role in economic output that it becomes very important for us to understand and explore as to what is their impact on economic development. And of course, like when you talk about economic development, there would be different trajectories at which various countries are going to be operating. It could be, say, a factor-driven model to efficiency-driven system or an innovation-driven system. Across the board, it is always going to be SMEs which will actually create solutions. In fact, a lot of us tend to forget, or a lot of us people tend to forget, that it is typically the SMEs who are creating world-beating innovations over a period of time. If you really look at the world in the last 20 to 30 years, even in the age of internet, there were small, young enterprises which created new solutions. If you really look at the numbers per se, the numbers are something very interesting from, say, the Fortune 500 enterprises. It's not the large enterprises which created solutions that resolved the problems of the world or faced the technological challenges or created better technological solutions. It was always the new kid on the block or a new enterprise that got created, which of course scaled up much faster and became a large enterprise. Google, for an example, is a great example per se. The second thing that, of course, moving ahead from here is there are aspects which include wide range of issues, like, but not limited to poverty alleviation. If you really look at poverty, or per se across the world. If you really look at the Indian context, and let me give you an example from India, India has been at the forefront of reducing poverty over a period of time. In fact, China also has done that. And what was it actually driven through? It was driven through creation of small and medium enterprises. In fact, if you really look at the opportunities that exist, if you really talk about labor force participation rates, then it has to be that most of the employment is going to happen within the small and medium enterprise. The clean energy solutions, where traditionally it has always been thought that the most polluting enterprises could actually be small and medium enterprises. But if you really look at it, the biggest impact also in the world, if assuming that is true for a moment, that they were the polluting enterprises, they also create the maximum bang for the buck in terms of the solutions that they can actually create. So if it becomes very important for us to explore what can actually happen for the 17 SDGs. And when you talk about SDGs, there's an important aspect that the way the world is progressing on SDGs. The idea was that by 2030 we would achieve the SDGs. We are not going to achieve that by any stretch of imagination. The numbers that it states that at the current pace of change, the world will achieve SDGs by 2175. That means we are still about 150 years away from achieving these sustainable development goals. If you really talk about a country like India, we are expected to achieve the SDGs by about 2060. So that means that there is a huge lag that exists in terms of achieving the SDGs. And if we want to hasten the pace, how do we do that? We have to enable enterprises, we have to enable individuals to really move into that direction. But what is it that MSMEs should strive to achieve? So there are two things that we have to really understand or really look at. One is that, of course, pursuing SDGs, MSMEs can contribute to sustainable future and continuously update their survival and growth strategies. And why does it become important for sustainable future? If you ask me, if at any given point in time in the history of the world, if humanity is in crisis, the time is now because of the climatic changes that are happening. It is quite possible that within the next 2,000, 3,000 years, we might actually become extinct as a species if that actually happens. And that will happen because of the mistakes that we have done in the past. And those mistakes are in terms of like how we have exploited the environment and things. And this is where it becomes important that each one of us, whether it is the government, it is the not-for-profit enterprises, or MSMEs, or large enterprises, or individuals, we have to work towards really resolving or solving for the challenges that are there. And of course, if you really look at MSMEs, they stay abreast or they need to change or must look at imbibing the better practices and technologies that are there. And if you talk about sustainable business models, they can unleash an amazing economic opportunity, which could be about $12 trillion and generate about 380 million jobs. That itself is a huge thing. And when you talk about opportunities which could be through sustainable business models, it is about solving for the challenges that the world is seeing. A very simple example I would like to invoke from, say, the Indian context. There is a company called GNFC, that is Gujarat Narmada Fertilizers Corporations, or Corporation. And what they do is that they're able to collect seeds from a plant called neem. And those seeds have actually been able to use, or they're used for creating soap and oil and stuff. And when you're able to do that, what you've been able to do is that you've been able to involve tribal people and tribal women specifically to really pick up the seeds. That has created enough and more economic opportunity. Their income levels have actually increased. In fact, their income levels have increased at least about 10 times over the last 3 years. That itself is an amazing example of how you can create a unique business model. It's a small enterprise model that you've actually created, a self-help group model per se. So what we are saying is that there are huge opportunities that actually exist for solving. And when you talk about role of MSMEs in achieving the SDGs, it of course provides opportunities for the marginalized communities. And when I say marginalized, would mean that whether you are part of the economic system or not, it takes care of what I call enhancing small-scale farming to so on and so forth. So there are many of those activities that have to be looked at, and SMEs can solve for each one of those in a very unique way. See, a very interesting example, say, of water, making water or drinking water available across the country would mean that we have to really find out that as to how we can create a solution which is a low cost solution for giving water or dispensing water at various locations. It can be used across the world. Right now, it is being used in India. It is being used in Africa. And how you're doing it is that you actually create a reverse osmosis process at scale, and people are able to buy water at a very, very negligible price. So what we are seeing here is a very important set of what I call solutions. Another thing on sustainability, like a lot of people talk about circular economy, and what we have noticed is that within that whole idea of circular economy, uh, Apple as a large enterprise exists, but there is a secondary market for Apple phones. And there are companies in India which started as a small enterprise, which has turned into a large enterprise now. But what they did, the company is Cashify, wherein he's able to what I call sell the old phones or create a secondary market for it. And that creates a whole huge aspect of reduction in waste, creates an economic opportunity for people. They are able to use a fairly good technology at a lesser price, and so on and so forth. So what we are really saying is that how unique models can actually get created. But fundamentally, if you really look at what is the life cycle and functioning of MSMEs, there are four typical stages as you would look at. One is, of course, market entry, but the challenge of policy making is that they tend to focus on market entry because the metric that we would actually look at using across the world is about firm creation. What are the number of firms that actually got created, new businesses that got created? But are we actually looking at something in terms of saying as to what is their survival rate? What is the kind of job creation that has actually happened there? What is the level of productivity that they have? And then, of course, if they want to exit, like how easy is it to exit? So the question here is that for policymakers, the idea is to actually create a conducive business environment wherein they are able to function better. The second thing, or one of the lacunas within the small and medium enterprises, and I actually see that is that the imbibing the spirit of research and development. They can actually solve or they do some process engagement or innovation, but typically speaking, R&D spends are fairly limited by the MSMEs. Of course, that is limited because they do not have the wherewithal to do it. So what is it that we can actually do to resolve that problem? Either we can actually have a cluster program wherein we are able to create common practices or common pool of knowledge, common pool of information, facilities wherein people are able to come together and solve the problems. And R&D becomes exceedingly important because typically what happens within the Asian context, and quite so in many countries that we are really talking about, this is where governments are investing in R&D rather than the MSMEs or enterprises investing. Let me give you a figure for India. 70% of the research and development budget of the country is done by the government, and 30% is happening from enterprises, and that to large enterprises. So that means there is a missing link. And what is it that we are able to do to create that R&D structure? And as we were really looking at the study, and of course, we wanted to understand what is the kind of uh, concept that we have to look at. Of course, we wanted to look at the competitiveness framework as developed by Professor Porter. We talk about the national diamond, the factor conditions, land labor capital, the demand conditions, and so on and so forth, or institutions for collaboration and things. If you really look at it, the question is going to be that what is the level of availability of talent to what are the kind of ideas that we are able to do, how conducive that environment is. But this framework that we were using, it actually helps in identifying what are the areas of improvement and what is it that we need to actually do. So this was the dimensions of the large diagnostic that we actually looked at. And this dimension of or dimensions were about understanding economic activity, the sectoral compositions. Of course, like MSMEs would be across the board. Like they could work from a very simple aspect, like say working in agriculture, basic food processing, to a very sophisticated things, which is technology driven through making some specialized bearings. So you could actually be across the spectrum of how things could be. So they have huge diversity per se. But now, of course, what we really need to look at from this competitiveness diagnostic point of view is that what is the context in which they operate? What is the regional structure that they have? What are the large trends that are being looked at? And this is what we wanted to understand. And we looked at a certain set of indicators in terms of understanding what is really happening within the various set of countries. And just to share a certain set of data, if you really look at it, if you ask me as to what is the performance of what I call APO countries or Asian Productivity Organization countries in terms of like who are the member states, what are the key indicators? If you really look at, say, a place like India, SMEs contribute close to about 30% of GDP, and things labor force participation rate is about 24%. But if you really look at a place like Fiji, it is just that about 18% of contribution of SMEs to GDP. So that means Fiji has a huge opportunity for really scaling up as what I call SME contribution and really moving up the scale. And when you talk about Pakistan, it is, and of course, Pakistan does face an economic crisis, but I think the solution for them is also driven through SMEs because they can actually invest in SMEs, or the SMEs can actually focusing on really solving for the challenges that they face. And the labor force participation is 21%. So how do we really, so this gives me a very clear understanding in terms of how things are. But one of the biggest things that we do see is female labor force participation. And what we do see is that within this context, across the countries that we were really looking at, 15% being the lowest labor force participation for women to about 39%. This means that there is a huge challenge in economies right now. And the challenge is in terms of how do we involve the female labor force within the economic activity. We need to find those solutions. We need to create those aspects. And I think SMEs are the set of body which can actually drive that. In terms of economic activity, what is the growth in new firms or change in composition? We do see certain set of numbers. We are seeing growth of about 1% in a place like, say, Thailand, to about 18% in India in terms of growth of new firms. So this also gives me a very interesting indicator in terms of what is the kind of economic activity that we are actually seeing right now. And when you talk about one of the biggest parameters for understanding success is share of SMEs in exports. What we did find that in a place like Mongolia, 2.3% of what I call as exports are driven through SMEs. But where in a place like India, it is about 49%, Fiji is about 25%, Vietnam is 20%, Cambodia is about 10%, and so on and so forth. So what we are really saying here is that SMEs or small and medium enterprises can actually drive a lot of economic growth. And when you are driving export, that means there is a huge improvement in productivity. You are actually talking about scale, price points, which are driven through competitiveness and productivity measures, which is actually making SMEs become more successful across the world. So these are some of the points that we can actually look at in some of the data. But if you really talk about the larger APO countries' performance and competitiveness framework, what we did find is that SMEs' contribution to GDP, the contribution varies from about 18% to 58%. Employment within the sector, the number of employees in the SME sector is influenced by factors like population size and the overall labor force. But as I said earlier, it is about a very important aspect that we need to look at, and that is in terms of understanding the labor force participation. The other thing was about informality rates. And we did see through the data itself that there are high rates of informality and within the space itself or within the MSMEs. But what are the policy implications? And the policy challenges poised by informality and the discrepancies in budget allocations underscore the importance or necessity for tailored policy approaches. So what governments need to do right now across the board within the member states or the countries that we have looked at is that they need to actually have tailored policy. And tailored policy does not mean that it is just MSME. It has to be tailored to the sector that they're operating in, because each of the sectors would actually have a different reality. Textiles have a different reality. To automotives or automotive ancillary units will have a different reality. And when you talk about automotives, so countries which are facing or having those sets of industries will understand that or will have noticed that the new technologies that are coming through, specifically through electric vehicles, and there are those zero emission mandates that are coming through. If those things continue, that means there is going to be a huge change in the industry structure that we are looking at. So we need to have MSMEs move towards R&D, the policy support that needs to happen, and how they are able to move into the next dimension. Because internal combustion engines are going to be defunct in the next 20 to 30 years, given how the trajectory of the world is. The population is becoming more and more aware that they do not want to use such sets of products. So these are some of the things that we have to look at. And then, of course, a couple of examples in terms of understanding as to when you talk about a place like Cambodia, they have done some amazing work. But then what is it that they need to do to empower SMEs within the state? So like one is, of course, would need to strengthen the policy and regulatory environment to foster human capital. In fact, like from a competitiveness viewpoint, I think the most important aspect that the world needs to really function and look at is about improving the quality of labor. And when I say improving the quality of labor is by in terms of training them, by providing the right sort of what I call educational opportunities. Today, what we are seeing is that educational outcomes across the board have actually significantly reduced because of COVID. So you need to fundamentally find a way to really recover from those losses that we might actually have faced because of the COVID pandemic. And when you talk about learning losses that have happened, it says that for the younger people who are within the foundational years, because they will come into the labor force in the next 10 years, and it'll take us about 6 years to recover from the learning losses that actually occurred during the pandemic. So we need to really focus on them right now, because we are talking about the future aspect as well. We are talking about 10 years, 15 years down the line, and what needs to be done for that. Then, of course, like we have to find, or Cambodia will need to find a way to improving financial access to within the enterprises. So if you really look at these examples, I am talking about various set of examples within the slides. I will not touch upon all the countries, but what I really wanted to say is that what is China doing? Or enterprises are aligning their sustainable development goals with their sustainable strategies. So there is a little more sophisticated small and medium sector within China itself. Then, of course, when you talk about the way forward, it is going to be about how ROC or Republic of China are enhancing the CSR initiatives and how they're really improving things there. Fiji has its own strength. They need to strengthen their SME institutional framework and so on and so forth. So India is an interesting example, which I would like to talk about a little more. If you really look at India, India has done something very interesting, and which is an example for many countries to look at as well. One is, of course, clear understanding that MSMEs provide for a fairly large chunk of employment. So you need to find a way to strengthen. So what they've done is that with the production link incentive scheme that actually did happen or is happening right now, they've also said that how do we create an ecosystem around this? So if there is a large enterprise which actually gets some support in terms of creating the enterprise, the small enterprises can actually be part of the ecosystem, and there is a huge multiplier that can happen because the production link incentive scheme is actually giving you multiple sets of things. Like one is, of course, direct impact. The second one would be the indirect impact, and third is effectively the induced impact that actually happens. So you can see those multipliers that have happened. So there is this whole Udyam portal wherein you have actually found a way in terms of saying that, okay, how SMEs can actually be part of the registration process, and it actually opens up opportunities for contracts and everything. And there are those grievance redressal proposals that have also been created. So having said that, I have within the presentation talked about all the countries, but I think at least for this presentation, I would just like to quickly skim through the countries in terms of Philippines or what are the way forward, or Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. I would invite everybody to look at these slides as you are going through it. But I just wanted to talk about the learnings that actually emerge from this exercise. So when you really talk about what are the kind of learnings that actually emerge, is one that the analysis reveals that the 4 stages of the SME cycle that we talked about in the beginning indicate that MSMEs have not transitioned to full-fledged entrepreneurs. Like they're still stuck somewhere in the small space or whatever. We need to find a way to really push them from being 1, 2 people enterprise, 10 people enterprise to a larger thing. Of course, there are regulatory issues in terms of like why scaling up does not happen. We need to reduce those barriers and things. In fact, we also have to find a way to really make people understand and everybody to appreciate that job creation will always happen through enterprise creation and enterprise success. Well, a lot of mindsets would actually occur across the countries wherein they will tend to believe that enterprises can be exploitative. No, like the resolving the problems of the world or creating solutions for the world are going to be driven through enterprise creation, because they create jobs, they alleviate or reduce poverty, they create solutions for either you talk about healthcare or if you want to talk about education and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the other learning that we really talk about is, uh, and that was a common thing that happens across the world, and that is about lack of finance. The capacity for the medium and small enterprises to raise money is a very massive issue, and we need to find a solution for that. And across the board, R&D support, research and development, and I did talk about it in the beginning as well. And what is it that we need to do? And then failure to achieve cost efficiencies, like like of course there is that U-shaped curve in terms of how cost will actually happen, and you will find a certain scale at which you'll have the best possible thing or a cost curve. So if you really have that, or if you're able to achieve that, how is it that people can learn from it? How they how they really create those eh, decent working conditions along with it, and so on and so forth. uh, there is that other thing that MSMEs face the challenge of informality, which is linked with lack of skilling in the workforce. We need to create programs across the world wherein skilling is something that happens. You might have a great education sector, but at the end of the day, you need to skill your people to really move into a certain set of workforces. And of course, today there are opportunities in terms of creating some solutions. But when you talk about, say, something like a gig worker, that would actually happen. But most of these gig workers are working in areas where there are those institutional voids or there are those challenges within infrastructure. The success of people like, say, Zomato's of the world in India, which is a food delivery service, that actually happens because we have fairly bad traffic. People don't want to move out and things. So you're creating those solutions. But I think people will move away from those set of things over a period of time when infrastructure develops better across the countries, or once you are able to reduce the time spent on the road and so on and so forth. Uh, and if you really look at some of the efforts, like Mongolia has granted a 348 million in long-term concessional loans to SMEs, and then what we have seen is that they have uh, it has created close to about 52,000 jobs, and it has preserved the existing jobs. And then, of course, if you really look at the time frame, this was something very interesting. And towards the end, it was bang in the middle of the pandemic. And then Cambodia's Ministry of Economy and Finance has established an SME bank, benefiting about 700 odd enterprises, MSME champions portal in India, and things. So what we are saying is eventually 2 or 3 points, like the last set of points from my side, in terms of saying that governments must formalize enterprises and workforce, make business registration processes easier. Today, what we notice is that there are fairly difficult situations in terms of business processes, sustaining enterprises. And one of the biggest things that I feel that SMEs, or what they need to do, is that they will need to find solutions to really go to the world. How we can actually use internet to going to the world across the board. So say a very simple, like a person, like across the country, like any country that we really talk about, whether we talk about Fiji or Cambodia or India or Thailand or whatever, these are exotic countries. And when I say exotic in terms of the rich cultural heritage and uh, the kind of what I call artisans that actually exist within these countries. And if these are the people, can we improve their conditions? Can we create opportunities for them? Can we use what I call better value extraction, and how we are able to use that digital footprint for better value extraction as we move across the board? And I do see that there are important elements that can actually be done here. So, what is the way forward on this? So, the ultimate goal is to initiate a cross country dialogue. I think everybody should come together. This is just one of the sessions, but I think this is where all the thinking people from various countries come together and create what I call a common idea in terms of what needs to be done further. Because if we are able to solve the challenges that we face within Asia, I think we are able to solve the challenges of the world. Because I am convinced in my mind the future of business, the future of economic thinking, the future of solutions for the world are going to be driven from the East rather than from the West. We have always looked at the idea of the West in terms of saying, or these are the developed economies like the US, the European Union, or whatever, and who are actually going to come and solve the problems. No, I think it is going to be enterprises from the East, from the countries that we are talking, who are going to resolve or solve the problems of the world. And they can actually get used in places like Africa, Latin America, and the challenges that we face. And then, of course, we can also look at, say, how we can use the framework that we have to really making conditions better. Possibly, we can actually have a trajectory that can get mapped over a period of time. That this is the end point. This is this perfect status that we want, and what is the kind of movement that is happening towards achieving the frontier. And we should map that possibly every year. The country should map that. Policymakers should map that. And then SDGs are intrinsic to SMEs development, because when you talk about it, I think any of the SDGs. It is the SMEs, if they do their thing perfectly, they resolve for many of the issues. And I'm super excited about like at least a couple of things. Like one is better jobs, more cleaner places that we are really talking about, clean, the solutions that are going to happen, poverty alleviation, labor force participation, and so on and so forth. Across the 17 SDGs, it is going to be the SMEs which are going to resolve for the challenges. And I think they bring in the heft to what I call create the new paradigm of what is going to drive the world tomorrow. So thank you. So these are some of my initial thoughts. I hope I've not exceeded my time, but thanks a lot for the opportunity for sharing some of my views. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for sharing your expertise and shedding light on the transformative journey of SME in the contributing to a more sustainable, prosperous Asia. Your insights have provided us with a comprehensive understanding of the intricate relationship between SMEs, sustainable development, and the UN SDGs. And let now we can start the Q&A session. My first question is, can you highlight some key performance indicators that distinguish the top performing APO countries in terms of SME contribution to meeting the SDGs, and what lessons are the country can draw from their success? Could you
Yep.
please?
So I think, say, one of the most interesting things that we really talk about is in terms of, say, labor force participation rates. What we have noticed is that SMEs have been able to resolve or solve for increased labor force participation for women, or female labor force participation has actually increased over a period of time. That is a very definitive thing that MSMEs drive. The other thing, if you really look at it, what as a performance metric, I would rather say is that today it is the SMEs who are creating solutions for less polluting initiatives, and they have done that. They are actually working with what I call tribal areas, tribal people, indigenous people, to really take their products to the world. And that also creates that sectoral composition, which is very, very interesting. But some of the other numbers, which I just like to share, is in terms of saying that when you talk about SMEs within the manufacturing sector, uh, uh, 31% of people who are employed within the manufacturing sector in India are within the SMEs. So that is something very interesting in terms of the numbers. If you really look at some of the other numbers in terms of level of education of employees, 31% of working age population, which lacks basic education, but we would need to work towards that, or women as entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. So they become very important parameters today. And when you talk about achieving of SDGs, one thing is very, very clear, and that is that we are very slow in terms of moving into that direction. As I said in the beginning of my talk, the world will achieve SDGs by 2175, which is about 150 years away. That means our pace of change is so slow that we are missing the boat right now. And the challenge is now the challenge of sustaining the world or creating a planet which is able to sustain life for a longer period of time. Because like we need to remember one thing, and that is that we are in middle of the sixth mass extinction. The rate of loss of species today is the highest and than any other point in the time of history of the world. When I say history of the world, into the history of the planet, if that is true, that means the resolution will have to happen now and really move things forward. So that is what we really need to move towards. So these are some of the ideas, but we need to hasten the pace as quickly as possible. We need to enable enterprises, either small or large, local communities, and really take things forward. Over to you, Mr. Sa.
Oh, yeah, thank you for this question. My second question is, in the context of SME transformation, how critical is adoption of technology, and are any specific technologies that you see as the game changers for SME pursuing the SDGs?
Oh,
Yeah.
technology is at the forefront of everything today. If you really look at this important thing, the world has been driven through technology in the last 20, 30 years. If you really look at it, if you really look at the history of the world in the last 200 years, it was always a certain technology which drove something, and it was around which there were solutions that were created: the steam engine revolution, the mass production era, the world of the internet. And now, if you really ask me, it's the world of artificial intelligence. And the small enterprises can actually use all this to really be at the peak in terms of understanding what is happening and create solutions on top of it. Today, if you really look at, I am absolutely convinced in my mind that it's the today, with the access of internet, with the access of, or the idea of the smartphone and everything, there are huge and many opportunities that actually get enabled for SMEs today. It is about finding solutions that we are able to build on top of the devices that we are using and taking it to the people rather than anything else. The technology is there, the access is there. How do we create business models which are able to solve? So the challenge, I would rather say, is rather than adoption of technology, the technology is all pervasive, it exists, is going to be that how do we use technology to create new business models and take it to the world? If you are able to find solutions, like a very simple thing across the world, Uber exists, and you have local services that across that. What they have been able to do is that they have been able to create opportunities for people with their vehicles, where they're able to use their vehicles in free time or whatever, they're able to drive and make money. So that means there are more solutions across the world that exist. So it becomes a battle of business models today and things, because technology is something which is all pervasive, all available. But having said that, I think there's an important aspect that we need to understand, and that is about how do we look at the latest technologies that exist and imbibe within our system. I'll take you back to an example of about 20, 30 years back, which might look funny, but at the end of the day, it tells us about a very unique thing that happens. The first thing is that if you really look at there used to be a very important sports good cluster in India in the city of Jalandhar. Uh, but what we did see is that that cluster died down over a period of time, or it really diminished in terms of size over a period of time. And why did that actually happen? Because we were not looking outside in terms of what were the latest technologies that were available. A very simple thing like a badminton racket, from moving from a wooden racket to a carbon thing, was something that was happening during that point in time. And the manufacturing system in Jalandhar did not even understand it. So this leads us to an important question of how we are able to bridge the gap between, say, SMEs and possibly institutions that exist, or academic institutions that exist, who are possibly at the forefront of understanding that knowledge. So can we create that academic enterprise bridge wherein they're able to share that knowledge and things? So I look at it as a larger issue of how we can create some opportunities and create an ecosystem, rather than a very simplistic thing in terms of like saying that what is the one unique technology. So it is about business models, it's about academic enterprise association or knowledge sharing, and how we are able to create those new solutions for the world. And I think the last thing that which I would like to say on this question is that, like, a lot of enterprises feel very worried about sharing information or sharing knowledge. that transparency should exist, like, because knowledge sharing will always make the world move faster forward and improve the quality of life. I think we need to understand that it is about quality of life of people that we are looking at than anything else. Over to you, Dr.
Okay, thank you. Because you mentioned about the SME and education institution that should be sharing their information, I think. And so the next question that I see that your presentation mentioned about the finance and R&D support for SME. My question is, what would be the best way to address the common challenges faced by SME, specifically a lack of finance and R&D support?
So that's a very important question, Mr. Sai. Like, we need to find. I think when you talk about SMEs, one of the biggest challenges is that they do not one have a lot of money to spend on R&D. So we have to find a way to create an aggregation of those people in terms of, like, can we create a common facility center? Can we make, can about say 10, 20, 30, 40 or 50 people of a certain agglomeration come together and try to find solutions, or create an aspect wherein they're able to move forward with those things. That is one of the aspects that can happen. Uh, and then, of course, when you talk about R&D support, I think the most important aspect that actually happens here is that, as I said earlier as well, that R&D support has to happen through educational institutions combining their know-how with the SMEs. I think one of the most important things that needs to be done is that we need to find a way that, and I'm again convinced in my mind on that as well, is that, like, the best of knowledge, the best of solutions are always going to be there in those knowledge creators, what you would call as professors, or those people. And we need to actually ask them to create enterprises around their ideas, or work with the SMEs to what do you call fructify those ideas. And they should be part of those business creation models itself. We need to move into that direction as well, because that is where solutions are there. I think there can be what I call research efforts that actually happen around this as well. But if you ask me, like, from a governmental viewpoint, I think that there should be a larger incentive that should be given, or breaks that can actually be given to SMEs to invest in R&D and really creating solutions in the world. What we do see today is that there are a certain set of places, like, or in countries where a lot of activity does happen, they become to the forefront of technological improvement. But there are some missing elements in some of the Asian countries, and how do we really bring that into the system? Like, I think we need to learn from Japan per se, and like how they were able to use R&D as an example and create solutions for the world. So we need to wear the lens of creating a solution for the challenges that we face, and then look in R&D and move forward.
Okay. For example, in my country, the government support just less than 0.1% of GDP to support the R&D. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The next question. Uh, how do you see regional variations impacting SME ability to transform and contribute to the SDGs? Are there distinct challenges, success story, and differ across ASEAN regions?
Oh, definitely. I think this is again a very spatial economy question, or economic geography question. We do see a huge set of variation that happens within countries and between countries as well. If you really talk about a very simple set of numbers, which I would like to give from India, uh, if I break India into districts, what we would find is that close to about 80% of India's what I call economic contribution happens from 20% of the districts. And that's a typical Pareto thing that happens, and that is happening within Asia as well. Like, so, the top 20, what I call 20% of the countries will contribute 80% of the GDP. And those spatial differences actually do exist that we are actually seeing. And then, of course, the challenges that we see within these countries are also very, very different because economic geography presents different sets of challenges. So when you talk about a place like, say, India vis-a-vis Pakistan or Sri Lanka or whatever, I think, unfortunately, for a place like Pakistan, they're having or Sri Lanka have faced a certain set of economic crisis or challenges in the last few years, especially post-pandemic. So their challenges vary from in terms of revival of the economy to really push into that direction. And this is where I think we need to open up solutions for better trade or facilitation of trade. And this is where the whole community of countries in Asia can come together and really find solutions for them. But at the end of the day, the challenges are very unique in terms of, say, job creation is one of the challenges somewhere, pollution is a challenge somewhere else, and it is going to be spatially different. But if you really look at it, there would be a certain set of places where enterprise creation is far better or easier vis-a-vis enterprise creation or sustaining an enterprise in a certain part of the other parts of Asia. We need to have a way in which we are able to imbibe the spirit of entrepreneurship, wherein we are able to celebrate entrepreneurship, wherein we are able to say that, assuming that you fail, Eastern societies can be very brutal, as I say, at points in time, and that includes me as a person. Like we take failure very seriously. We get very dejected with that. If there is a certain idea which does not become successful, that does not mean that that's the end of the thing. As life, we need to find a way in wherein we are able to actually create a spirit of success failure that goes in tandem, and we are able to move things forward. Dr. Sa.
Yeah. Dr. Kapoor, my next question, based on findings, are there specific policy recommendations or interventions that governments can undertake to better support MSME in their transformative journey?
Oh, I think so. Two or three things which I think we need to do, and one thing is very clearly that we need to focus on skilling of the workforce. There has to be a policy action wherein you say that, okay, skilling of workforce is very important. Either you do it through uh, corporate social responsibility programs, or you actually create a special budget or whatever that needs to be taken care of. The second thing is they must also formalize what I call enterprises and workforce and make business registration processes easier. Like today, what we do see is that there would be archaic laws which can stall the growth of a certain set of enterprises, or they can actually create unnecessary challenges. The compliance burden that actually exists across different sets of countries. We need to find a way to reduce that compliance burden as well, because like generally speaking, what I do notice, and which is of course not part of my study, but I do notice it otherwise as well. So I would just like to pick it up from that thing is that a lot of people tend to believe that what I call people who are creating enterprises come with a wrong moral compass or whatever, which is not a fact. I think it's the enterprise creators who are trying to solve the challenges that the society is facing, and we need to celebrate that, and we need to make life easier for them. And they need to find a way in terms of, like, one of the mechanisms that can actually be looked at is uh, how do we create that digital visibility and transparency that exists within that space. And of course, create those common facility centers, understand, and the policy imperative should also be that in places, like, you need to do a geographical understanding of your sectors across the countries. If you are from, say, Vietnam or Sri Lanka or whatever, or India, each of these countries, like, are large per se, and they actually have a certain agglomerations where a certain set of enterprises are situated. So within those clusters and within those agglomerations, we need to create specific actions to improve their productivity, to improve their conditions, and possibly take them out to the world. Dr. Sa.
Oh, thank you. That giving on the policy recommendation. My next question: given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on business, including MSME, how do you foresee the pandemic era influencing the trajectory of MSME transformation and alignment with SDGs?
Well, that's a very, very interesting and an important question. If you really look at it, uh, pandemic was a very, very difficult period uh, for the world, for the population at large. But this was also an important period where people were able to understand or see what are the kind of challenges that actually exist in the world per se. What are the kind of solutions that we need to create? So there is that. If you really look at the post-pandemic era, what we are seeing is that there is a very interesting set of ideas that have emerged. And what do I see is that this is where SMEs have also understood that they need to solve for challenges that actually exist. And what are some of the challenges that they understood is very clearly say poverty was there, or how do we really make sure that food goes to people, or what about, because during the pandemic we also understood that, oh, pollution gets reduced, and there is this, how do we create those solutions to reduction in pollution across the system. What about issues of gender equality, improving labor force participation rates for women? And what we are seeing is the trajectory is already becoming visible across SMEs across the world, or across the Asian context as well. And they do align very well to the MSMEs, or the kind of thing that they're doing. So if you really look at it, I think some of the most important aspects which I do see is in terms of how we are even looking at, say, industry innovation, product development that is actually seeing, and that is becoming visible. And when I say product development, it's creating solutions for the people across the board. Or even if you talk about cities, and if you talk about communities, like how local communities are working together to solve or creating self-help group models and things, and that has actually mushroomed over a period of time. So I see a certain transformation that is happening. Early days, but I think this momentum will continue over a period of time and solve for a lot of challenges that we face.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. My last question. Given the global nature of SDGs, how can international collaboration and partnerships contribute to success of SME transformation for sustainable development, especially across borders?
Like, this is where countries will have to come together and say, let's come together as countries, let our businesses flourish together, let them work together. There is a common goal that we actually have. And that, what is that common goal? That common goal is not just about GDP growth. That common goal is about what I call social progress as well. Because today, like, the biggest problem in the world is that we get obsessed with the idea of GDP growth. But we also have to understand it's about social progress. Because if your MSME is successful, GDP will happen. But it also does something very important. It improves the social conditions of being. It also helps improving my quality of life. And this is where I think we need to share solutions together. This is where enterprises should be allowed, and they should find a way to come together. More knowledge exchanges should actually happen. I think we need to find a way, like the biggest thing that we have seen in the world, and a lot of people don't like my saying it, but then it's become a lot easier to move money. It becomes a lot easier to move products, but it has become more difficult over a period of time to move ideas and move people to work together. So we need to find a way that people are able to work together, people are able to share ideas together, and that is where the world is going to be a better place tomorrow. It's a world of ideas. It's a world where ideas will convert into solutions for whatever we are saying. Like, even if there is a war, it is the exchange of ideas which is going to resolve it. It's not about anything else. It's not about force. It's about humanity coming together, living together in a peaceful way, and really saying that, okay, we are going to solve the challenges that we face together. And this is what countries need to do. This is where governments will have to come together. This is where trade enterprises will have to come together. This is where people will have to come together. Eventually, at the end of the day, people just work, are amazing, resilient people. Humans are able to work with each other and solve for the challenges that they face. Over to you, Dr. Sa.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for your useful insights Do you have any final thoughts for our viewers?
Oh, I think this has just been a fascinating interaction, but I would just like to say one final thing. I think all of us together should work towards the idea of improving the quality of life of our citizens. Today, if I am an enterprise, if I really wear the lens of saying that, okay, how do I solve the challenge that a person faces, whether it is about hunger, whether it is about climate, cleanliness, education, or whatever, if I'm able to solve for the challenge that he faces, we create an opportunity for ourselves. We also make the world a better place for people across the board. But having said that, I think it has become more and more important for us, for the safety of the planet, for the survival of the human race, that we respect our planet much more. We work towards sustaining what we have, because this is the only world that we have got. We've got nothing else. We do not know what exists outside. There is no way that we can leave this place. Our life is going to happen somewhere else in the next 2, 3, 400 years. But at the end of the day, this is our home, and we need to protect our home. We need to work together to create solutions which help us protect our home, which is called the earth. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Dr. Kapoor, for joining us today. I am sure that our viewers enjoy your presentation and talk. Please continue watching the APO Productivity Talks and subscribe to the APO YouTube channel. I hope to see you on the next session. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.